All right, welcome to another episode of the Winefluence podcast. Today we got an amazing guest. Her name is Alexandra Watkins, and she's positioned herself very well in her niche, establishing herself as essentially a thought leader in the space that she's in. And her space is all around branding, coming up with names for your brands, and how powerful just a good name can be. She's authored a couple of books. She's got quite an influence on LinkedIn and email list. So first of all, I just want to say thank you, Alexandra, for taking the time to come on the show today.
Thanks for inviting me, Jeremy.
For sure. So do you mind just very briefly, maybe like 2 or 3 sentences, tell us a little bit about what you do in your own words?
Sure. If you have ever eaten a Wendy's Baconator, you have literally eaten my words. I name I name products and companies for a living, and I did name the Wendy's Baconator, and that's what I do. My company is called Eat My Words. We started out naming things that make people fat and drunk, and now we name everything from robots to racehorses. So I'm the author of Hello, My Name is Awesome, How to Create Brand Names That Stick, and I have I have my dream job, and I love what I do.
That's amazing. Yeah, I've eaten your words. I've had a baconator. This is all about sharing, overcoming barriers to sharing, and having reasons to share. And I'm just curious if you don't mind sharing like a story with us of maybe somebody or that you've impacted in a way you didn't expect, as a result of either doing your business or sharing.
Sure. There was a woman who her name it is Tejal Topawala, and she is a homestager, and she knew that her name was difficult for people, and she was really struggling with naming her business because she knew that people were intimidated to pronounce her name or they would get it wrong. And she discovered my book, and she was just so grateful to me because she realized that she could just brand her company with the name so she didn't have to use her own name. So I named it Paprika because she was all about color, and she was very bold, and she wasn't afraid to spice up a space. So that became her tagline. So it was Paprika, spice up your space.
Nice. That's like not necessarily something you directly expected as a result of like writing your book. It's not like you wrote your book and you'd think that someone like that would be like you'd be helping someone in that capacity.
Yeah, it's really neat. I do get a lot of people telling me that, they were really struggling, and I helped them break through or come up with something that they really loved, or shed an old name. It's kind of like if you had a high school nickname or something, like you just want to ditch it. Like I've been able to help people do I've been able to help people do that. So, and also
Wow.
a woman called me the Dr. Phil of brand names because I'll give it to you straight. She really appreciated that.
Nice. Yeah, that's great. That's great feedback. Before we jump into your story here, which I know is fascinating, I'm looking forward to that. Let's do a little bit of advice. We have a lot of influencers on the space, and you sort of became an influencer in your niche for naming businesses, brands, products, things like that. So if there's somebody who wants to establish themselves in their space as an expert or a thought leader, what would be some of your advice for like a newer person that is maybe early in their career that they're like looking far away and being like, I want to be, positioned well in this space later on?
Yeah, that's easy. I didn't start out with like I'm gonna do. Well, here's how it came about. I would advise you to do what I did and find something that nobody else is doing. There was already naming firms, but nobody was doing my style of names. They were all firms that hired linguists, so they were hiring people out of academia. And I came out of advertising. I never had any linguistic training at all. So my names were different. They were based on concepts instead of dead languages. So I was able to create really like names that made emotional connections, like a GPS for dogs, name Retriever, or the robotic vacuum Nito, or the Church of Cupcakes, names that made people smile instead of scratch their head. So that's how I was able to carve a niche out for myself and really differentiate me and my company from any other company. So that's what you need to do. Don't be a copycat. Find something really unique that find like if you can find three things you can say about yourself or your brand that nobody else can say about theirs, and I can do that with mine. Find five things. If you can do that, you're golden.
Okay, yeah, that's great advice. So, sort of, find the niche that isn't currently existing, and something that you've got the skill set to serve, and then just sort of aim in that direction because it's something that you have the capacity to serve, and you have, a passion for it.
Yeah, and the narrower the better. Don't try to be all things to all people. Like branding is is huge. And I didn't want to be a jack of all trades in branding. I wanted to specialize in names and taglines. And I did. And in the beginning, I was starting out with just food and beverage. And now, like I said, I do more than that. But if you can really narrow your focus, here's what happens. When like a Frito-Lay or Coca-Cola is looking for a naming firm, and they're looking at all these different firms with names that ironically aren't that creative, and they see Eat My Words, they're like, oh, they specialize, they get it, food and beverage. So my name is giving me a leg up compared to these other firms because I'm saying that I specialize in something. And Eat My Words still works as a name regardless of if you're a food or beverage client. But if you can really, really drill down and give yourself a competitive advantage like that, it will really help you. And don't try to be everything. I think it's really important to find out what you don't like to do and don't do it. I don't want to do identity design, graphic design. I don't want to do strategic analysis and all of that. I just want to be creative and create names and taglines. And I said no to everything else. And learning to say no will help you.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah, definitely, it's easy to spread yourself too thin, especially early on, by accepting things that maybe aren't as aligned to the niche that you're aiming for. So being able to say no and stay in that narrow focus is really important.
Yeah, when you say no, like here's an example. I got I I got an inquiry to do a project, and I wasn't really, it was a technology project, tech project, startup, and I wasn't really interested, and I said no because I didn't want to do it. And then boom, the next day I get Colgate contacting me, and they're a regular client, and they need two projects. So because I closed that window, I wasn't taking my time doing something that I didn't want to do, and I wouldn't have had time to work on Colgate. We're really busy. So that's what happens too. You end up doing what you love.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Well, congrats on getting to a position where you can do what you love on a day to day. That's amazing.
Thank you. Anybody can, if I made it happen with my background, anybody can make it happen.
So let's say you meet someone who is pretty well established in their space. What do you think something is like your secret sauce, like something that you're doing differently than the average person's doing to set yourself apart in your space that maybe other people can apply that are more established to their sort of niche that they're in?
Have a sense of humor. It's so sorely lacking in business. People take themselves far too seriously. And I think it's great with COVID. We've all let our guard down a little bit. We're showing ourselves in our homes or dressing more casually, maybe. And that's helping people to be more of themselves and their, to use a really like hackneyed word, authentic selves. But when you have a sense of humor, it goes so far. Like don't take yourself so seriously. Like we have, like in my office, I have a sofa made out of stuffed animals, right? Like that's fun. I use a magic 8 ball sometimes just for, for fun. I have all kinds of toys around me. I have a surfboard in my office. I have a really fun skateboard. I have a 1950s pink refrigerator. If you go to my website, Eat My Words, you can see all of our copy is really fun. The headline on our homepage is "Your brand name shouldn't look like you got drunk and played Scrabble." Right? Like, that's fun. And it's saying that you need a good brand name, but it's not so serious, right? And if you can say things like Jeremy, I did a presentation for your meetup group earlier, and you saw I have a bong in my
Yeah, I was about to mention
presentation.
that.
And like, people are like, whoa, it's a pink bong. Like, and
Yeah, because
don't,
you use that specifically used just for the context for the listeners. Like you said, like don't use these to, you don't need these to come up with names. And I think you put like the Scrabble, the
yeah,
Ouija
drunk
board,
and
and you
Scrabble.
had a bong.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, so find a way to inject humor into whatever you do. Like our parking sign when our office was in San Francisco and we had to have client parking, the sign said, "Eat my word." It was a little pink refrigerator and which is our icon, and it said, "Eat my words, client parking only. Violators will be eaten." And instead of just no parking, it said violators will be eaten. Like that's funny. And that ties into our brand. So yeah, also if you can have a brand with legs that kind of lends itself to a theme, like our blog isn't called blog, it's called the kitchen sink. So that's again like injecting some humor into it. People love humor.
Yeah, yeah, and I could see that the way that you said the space was when you're looking for your niche is lacking that like fun, joking kind of naming firm that was out there because it was mostly academia kind of space.
Yeah, and any business can have a sense of humor. We named a law firm Bedrock. There's a healthcare consultancy named Fresh Blood. I love that name. And like there's this gaming company and it's called Super Evil Megacorp. And they like, can you imagine getting a business card from someone who worked at Super Evil Megacorp? You would never throw it away.
Right.
So people like don't feel like you have to be all serious. Look, we're called Eat My Words, and we have clients like, Google, Disney, Twitter, Coca-Cola. So people want to work with people they like and companies they like, and if you can get them engaged through humor, it's a good way to get someone's attention.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so use more humor, especially for the established people, and I think that goes along with a lot of the stuff I hear with the experimentation, because you can experiment a lot with humor too, and try to tie that into things. Yeah, great advice. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, so let's jump into your story here a bit. I want to sort of figure out where it all started in regards to you sharing in a larger capacity. So, like, do you know? Can you define or can you think of like when the beginning was for having a platform or starting a platform?
Yeah. I I already had Eat My Words, and I was working with, clients, but I didn't have a I didn't have anything to really define my brand other than the theme. And I was like 7 a.m. I was kind of hungover at a national speakers organization convention, and I was watching Dan Heath, one of the Heath brothers, or actually it was Chip Heath, who's a big marketing guru, give a talk. And he had an acronym he was going through, success. And I said to myself, I need an acronym too. So I always have this philosophy: a name should make you smile instead of scratch your head. So literally on a cocktail napkin, just like, people say, oh, I did it on a cocktail napkin. I wrote smile and scratch down the cocktail napkin. And I was like, what word could be for each one? So I was like, smile, suggestive, memorable, imagery, legs, emotional. And then the C, scratch. So smile was what makes a name great. Scratch was when to scratch it off the list. And I had an acronym for that too, spelling challenge, copycat. So the H was hard to pronounce. So then I had a hook. And once I had that, I I felt like I had something that I could share with people to help them create and evaluate names. And it was an objective name evaluation test, super easy to do. And I got it in the Wall Street Journal like almost immediately. I had a PR firm and they got me some press there, which was great. And so once I had that to share with people, that was kind of the beginning of that. And then I was able to develop a talk, which started in Toastmasters as just a really simple 7-minute talk about the smile and scratch test. And now, all these years later, it's still my talk, but of course it's 45 minutes long and it's much more, it's really evolved and it looks a lot better. But I still have that original one from all those years ago, just to look back and reflect. But yeah, anytime you have something to share where you're giving people something for free and it can help them, and it's really easy too. Like the smile and scratch test, it's a no-brainer. It's like anybody can look at it and figure it out. Even like a fifth grader could figure it out. I think if you can be like, cut the jargon, don't try to be all fancy, just be real, suggestive, memorable, imagery, legs, emotional. That's all stuff like anyone can understand those things. I have a little line of copy to explain them, but be simple and effective.
Awesome. So you is really the catalyst of what launched all this was what you wrote on that napkin, just like coming up with that acronym so that you were like, okay, now I have something, I guess, worthwhile sharing or going bigger with. That you could then say, okay, let's go with it. Like it's something that you're definitely aligned with. The SMILE acronym itself was the core, and it's about your brand. And then you had it like a purpose now, like your why was sort of defined with that. It's like I need to get this message out there, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I'll tell you something neat about that story is shortly after that, I wrote to the Heath brothers and I thanked them and I told them that the story, like you guys inspired me to create this acronym. And I became a fan and I got to know them. And Dan Heath blurbed my book, and that means he like endorsed it. And his endorsement, it's on the cover, and it says,
Wow.
"You are nuts to name your company or product without consulting this book first." So that, like, I love how that came around.
That's huge. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were looking up to this person, and then you were able to now sort of be like, on the same level because now you're published, got a book, and like they were a big catalyst for your journey, and you were able to build a relationship there, and that's
Yeah.
really
And you know what, Jeremy, if you had asked me that question about, how I change somebody, like if you asked the Heath brothers that question, I'm their story, right? This woman saw us speak. We inspired her to create an acronym to something sticky because it was their book Made to Stick is my favorite business book, and I needed something sticky, so they inspired me to create that. And so that's a story.
wow. Yeah, I didn't think about it like that. So you're the story that they share, so that now their message can get out even further. So it sort of had it's like a compounding effect that sort of
Yeah,
happened.
yeah,
That's very cool. So you figured out, you created this hook, you developed a talk. Were you, when you started giving these talks, like were you comfortable, speaking on stages at that point? I'm
well,
trying to gauge like how you felt, like maybe when the
okay.
PR pushed it out to the
No,
New York
well, I'll
Times.
tell you. So I've always been confident and outgoing. So I joined Toastmasters, and which is this international speaking club, speaking in leadership. And I joined it because I wanted to go out and speak about my business, but I really wanted to learn some good techniques and get polished. So that's where I was able to do that. And you start small. You're just giving talks at eWomen Network, or just some little meetup groups. And so I did that, and you never speak for money in the beginning. You're just doing it for exposure and practice. And one time when I the more I knew my material, the more comfortable I got. And now, like you can see, you're asking me questions nobody's ever asked me, and I have answers and I'm confident answering them. So I remember the first time I spoke at Stanford at the grad school, it was at the marketing club, and I was so nervous and scared. I was super intimidated. And now I've been there. It was my ninth year this year, and I got there, thank goodness, like right before the campus shut down, a week before. But I'm standing on the same stage that Anderson Cooper stands on, and like I show up, I'm fine. There's no nerves. I know the thing. Like it was easy for me, but I know my material so well, and that's what I discovered. For me, it was just if I know what I'm talking about, I'm confident talking about it. But Toastmasters is incredibly helpful, and I highly recommend it for anyone, and also the National Speakers Association. And they're both groups are really friendly people. So if you're shy, they can help you. But Toastmasters, if you kind of want to overcome your fear, any fear of public speaking, Toastmasters is good. If you want to sharpen your skills, it's good for that as well. And then the National Speakers Association, if you really want to become a professional, that's a great group for you.
Yeah, and I would second that. I've been doing Toastmasters for a couple of years now, and it's been tremendously helpful for me. So if you're trying to overcome fears, Toastmasters is definitely a way to go. And yeah, I've been to a handful of NSA, the National Speaker Association meetings, and it's definitely a great group of people there too for becoming a professional speaker if that's what you're aiming for.
Yeah, and just a tip on Toastmasters, check out a couple different clubs before you join one because each one is different. I ran the San Francisco club, and when I joined, it was like a sleepy little club on life support, and I grew it to the biggest club in San Francisco, and there's now over 100 clubs just in San Francisco, and I just would cherry pick. I'd go to other clubs, find their best speakers, and then I'd poach them and bring them to my club. That's how I
Nice.
grew it to a big club. But yeah, it's really just it's good to practice. Practice makes perfect.
Yeah, and even when you had these opportunities to speak on stage, you found that 9 years of doing it, your comfort level, both in the subject matter and just in general, being on stages, has gotten much more comfortable. So you're able to not have to think much when now that you have these big events and you're speaking to these larger audiences. You're already comfortable with the topic. You're already comfortable speaking on stages. But it's the stepping stones that it took to get there. You weren't perfect in the beginning. So
Yeah, and now I am a professional, and I get paid a lot to speak, and TechCrunch and Startup Grind and Collision Conference, and
South by
I have a corporate
Southwest, I think
I
too.
I have a corporate sponsor, which is very nice to have.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and I think you spoke at South by Southwest as
Yeah,
well.
and
Nice.
that was part of my corporate sponsored me there as well. So if you can align yourself with, I was really lucky. I found a company that had a product that was completely aligned with what I talk about and kind of my values as a namer and so we discovered each other at the same time. It was like a total love fest. And I knew there was nobody else like me out there that they could hire. So I had an advantage there, and I was gregarious and outgoing and fun and funny, and I had a book, so all of that helped them want to align with me. But now, like, I'm doing a series of 5 webinars for Startup Grind for them. That's all based on this new naming course that I developed. So, it's funny, when COVID hit, I was like, all these speakers lost all their speaking engagements, but I actually got more because they weren't spending all this money flying people to conferences, so they could invest it in virtual conferences. But yeah, find somebody that shares your same brand values and get them to sponsor you as a speaker.
Yeah, great. That's great advice. So, how did you, I guess, initially feel like that motivation to get that message out there? So, like you came up with the hook, you developed the talks, and you just kept going down that path. But I guess why was it so important to get that message out there?
Because there's so many names that suck. I mean, look at like a, Xobni, Zobni. It's inbox spelled backwards. It's a horrible name. And I was living in the Bay Area and surrounded by these horrible startup names, and they just made me cringe. And I just had to rid the world of bad names. And that's truly what I was put on earth to do, I think, is help people just understand that these are bad. You can do a much better job. And you can, like, look, we named a GPS for dogs Retriever. When people hear that name, they smile. And like, if I can bring a little smile to somebody, that makes me really happy.
Right. So you're just like, solving the world's problems from like a name at a time kind of thing,
Yeah.
just putting more
Yeah.
smiles.
Yeah. I mean, it's nice. Like, we named a Spanish language school in Colombia Gringo Lingo. And people smile when they hear that. And it's just that little, jolt of dopamine that they get when they see, the Church of Cupcakes or a frozen yogurt store named Spoon Me. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. I think that, it's so important to have a powerful why, and it's clear that you have one, and I think that's essential to, to developing that platform and getting established itself as someone in your space, because you need to be driven to keep going and keep pushing and keep, growing in that space.
Yeah, thank you. Years ago, I was at a big conference and I didn't know anyone there, and I sat down for dinner, and sat next to this guy named Simon, and it turned out to be Simon Sinek. And this is before, it was Start With Why was already out, but it was not, he wasn't the like total, he was definitely known on TED, but he wasn't this giant superstar yet. And I kind of knew who he was because I had read about him in the program, and we had this really spirited conversation, and I got to know him a little bit throughout the conference. But he said, like, you definitely know what your why is, and that, like, coming from him, it felt so good.
Nice. Yeah, that's quite a compliment coming from Simon. So what is how do you see yourself as someone, or like how do you see yourself has changed through the process of all this? So like thinking back to when you're scratching on the napkin to now you've given tons of talks, and you've gotten yourself established in the space and worked with some of the biggest companies in the world. Like, how have you as like an individual, like as a person, changed from that, or maybe like self-developed, or like what kind of growth have you seen for yourself personally?
Well, that's a good question. I still see myself as that person. I know I'm not that person, but I'm humble like that person was, right? Because I know where I started. I also skipped college, so that just makes me super humble because, look, I after in eighth grade, I knew I wanted to be in advertising, and I begged my mother to not make me go to college, and I was able to talk my way into advertising, and that's another story. But so I'm very humble. So I don't see myself like this big diva or anything, but I do know that, I guess because I have a book and I can hold it in my hand, and like I can read the, Tony Hsieh from Zappos, and, Adam Grant, like these great reviews on the back cover. It's like, okay, like this is validating. Like this says that I am somebody, and all these big companies do hire me. So I have that, but I know what it's like to start a business and be small, and just getting my first clients and all of that. And it takes a long time. I'm still, look, there's companies like Landor that I'm, big branding firm, I'm sure 50 years old. So I'm still getting there. But I think I've changed just my confidence in my confidence. I've always been super confident because I was raised by a feminist, but my confidence in my business is just, off the charts because I know that I'm an expert in what I do. I'm absolutely know that. So that's really helped. And I also wanted to say one thing about speaking is I was giving one of my talks based on my Smile and Scratch test
Yeah.
presentation, and someone in the audience, it was at a meetup for entrepreneurs in San Francisco, someone in the audience worked for a publisher, and she was an intern, and she had the guts to speak up to her boss, who was this like big curmudgeonly guy named Jeevan at Barrett Kohler Publishers, and she had the guts to speak to just say, "Hey, I saw this woman speak. I think she would make a great author for us." I went to her website. She has a really good sense of humor, and that's how I got my book deal. And
Oh
actually,
wow.
he ended up. Jeevan ended up watching my talk, a recording of it, while he was on a plane going somewhere. He just watched my talk, and that's how I got my book deal.
Wow, that's an amazing story. I didn't know that. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it sounds like the biggest change for you is the confidence from when you started to where you are today. Because now you have that book you can hold up. You know, you've worked with all these clients, and you can say you've done it, kind of thing. So that's probably the biggest changing factor for you would be the confidence.
Yeah, and also I can charge a lot more too now, which is really nice. Yeah.
Yeah, and the confidence with your valuing yourself, you know, what you're worth, kind of thing.
Yeah. No, trust me, the first time I got paid $55,000 to name something, I was like, I can't, that was 2008. I couldn't believe it. But I did, and a former boss of mine who ran an identity design firm, I saw her and I said, "Oh, I'm just doing naming now." And she's like, "Oh, oh, you can't really make a living just doing naming." And I'm like, "Yeah, I can. I just charge a client $55,000 for a name." And she's like, "You can't charge $55,000 for a name." And I said, "But I did."
Wow, that's amazing. Well, congrats on that. I know it's much later today, but
Yeah, it's a different, obviously we're in a different time now. A different time. Yeah, that was back in the heyday. But it certainly felt good at the time. And I am able now, working with big clients has given me more credibility, and that helps me charge more money too. And
yeah,
the book was, if anyone's considering writing a book, having a book is so good for credibility. It's really important.
yeah, I've heard that and witnessed it. Don't have a book myself, but I have seen it. So let's talk a little bit about your community, if, I guess. So like, I'm sort of curious if you're. I know you said talked about Toastmasters and NSA, you know, Speaker Association, uh, but like, what did your communities look like? Like, did you create any communities? Are you very involved with any certain communities? Just sort of seeing like what kind of ecosystem that you had to surround yourself by to get that like support network to get you to where you are today.
Well, the biggest community that helped me was my fellow namers, and I am so grateful to them. When I started out, right, I was in advertising, and naming isn't part of advertising, it's part of branding. So I didn't know anyone in branding. So I had to LinkedIn helped me build my company, but I had to start like one by one by one, just finding people on LinkedIn, contacting them, inviting them over. I had a really cool loft in San Francisco, so I'd invite them over, and that's how I got to know people. I used to have a lot of parties, but I wanted to get to know the neighbors. So what I did is I had my loft in San Francisco was so cool. It was like floor to ceiling, eye candy. And I have that now where I work in my pool house, but it was back there, it was 900 square foot office that was just, you know, Pee Wee's. It was described by a journalist as Pee Wee's Playhouse on acid. So it was really easy to get people to come over. So I thought, well, I'll invite all the neighbors over. So I just, it's easy to find people. And then yeah, so many people said yes, and then there was people coming out of the woodwork like, "Oh, I want to come to your party. I'm a namer. I used to work at Landor or wherever," and like, and then people, I have never heard of you before, but that's how I established myself really quickly. And the
Hmm.
namers were so helpful to me. And look, people don't have to help their competitors, right? Most industries are so cutthroat. No one's going to give you any advice. And my namers, my mentor is Anthony Shore from Landor, who gave me my first big break. There's a guy named Phil at Tungsten, and I was talking to some guy the other day who was interviewing naming firms, and I said, "Who else are you talking to?" And he said, "I'm talking to Tungsten." And I was like, "Oh, tell Phil I said hi." He's like, "Oh, he loves you." I mean, like that's so nice, right? And
Right.
the humors, we all figure there's plenty of work to go around, but we all run into the same issues. And so we share strategies with each other, seek advice, and that's a really good community. So I love that. And then I
Hmm.
have, I'm not in Toastmasters here in San Diego. Right when I wanted to join, because I was so busy writing my book, and right when I wanted to join, COVID started. So I'd rather go when I can do it in person. But I do have Toastmasters that I've known for years that I'm still in touch with. Barrett Kohler, my publisher, who, Jeremy, your wife, Crystal, is part of that community. That's a huge community for me. There's no other publisher where their authors are so close and also helping each other out. They're not competitive. I mean, the biggest project I've had in years came through a fellow author at Barrett Kohler. So, and I don't do it for work. I just do it for fellowship. So those are my biggest communities here in San Diego. Because I was so chained to my desk when I moved here a couple of years ago, I haven't. I tried to form a community here. I had this party. I have a really awesome backyard. It looks like a resort. Jeremy's been here. I have like a surfboard fence and a big pool and a tiki bar. So I'm like, I'll have a party. And I named it NIMBY for networking in my backyard. And I had an open bar. And I thought that, I had a mic and like a PA system. And I thought everyone could have 30 seconds to go up, say who they are, what they were looking for. And all people did was go to the bar. And that's all people wanted to do was drink and hang out at the bar. So I couldn't really interrupt the flow to say, okay, now everyone can do their 30-second pitch. So that kind of fizzled, and I realized San Diego is not San Francisco, where any night of the week there's tons of networking events going on. So I haven't really found my people here yet.
Hmm. That's really interesting. Thanks for sharing the communities that you've been using. The parties one is the first time I've heard that answer come up.
Yeah, well,
I like.
my first party at Eat My Words, I knew two guys in branding, and I said, invite anyone you know that you think would be a good client for me. And a woman named Bonnie McFarland from Del Monte, who's the design director, came to the party. She looked around in my loft and she said, "We need you." And they're still my client to this day.
Wow.
And that
Yeah,
was years ago. That was like 15 years ago.
that's pretty impressive. That's the first time I've heard that kind of story.
Yeah, parties always pay for themselves, except the NIMBY party. That didn't really pay for itself.
Yeah. Well, it's a different kind of people in
Yeah,
those.
yeah,
Awesome. So, if you don't mind sharing, just from a high level and as much as you're comfortable sharing, there's a lot of people that are, authors or, creating platforms, and they're trying to figure out ways to make an income doing that so they can sustain, a life that they want. So, do you mind just sharing from like a high level the like income sources or like, where are you able to generate income from being
yeah,
like a self entrepreneur?
yeah. So book sales are a lot of people don't know this. I knew this because my parents were authors, among other things. You don't make any money from book sales. I make like $1 a book, I think. If you have a traditional publisher, if you self-publish, you'll make more, but you won't be able to, get your book entered into like prestigious award shows. Like my book is an Inc. top 10 marketing book. It never would have been on that list it won a Outstanding Works of Literature award last year, which is a big deal. The self-published books aren't accepted to those type of things. My book was also in airport bookstores. You can't do that if you're self-published, so there's definitely a trade-off. But the book, well, I'm not making money having a traditional publisher other than $1 a book. How I do make money is the book brings me clients. So some guy in the Denver airport picked up my book earlier this year and hired me for a $25,000 project. So that's how the book brings you business. And so if you're a consultant or any type of influencer where people are paying you, sums of money, the book can really help you. Also in consulting, that's so the book royalty is small, but book being a magnet, bringing in bigger fish, great. Um, I do. I'm not doing them right now because I've been so busy with my new online course and just bigger projects. But for the longest time, I did consulting calls, and I'll bring them back at some point. They started at $500, and then recently, until I cut them off, they were $2,500, and I would talk to someone for 90 minutes and give them, they'd send me their background information in advance, and I would give them name ideas. And I'm really fast at coming up with names, and I'm kind of an idiot savant. And as you can imagine, after doing this for 15 years, I've created thousands of names on lists, right? So I come up with them really quickly. So that's how I'm able to do it. But it was nice to just have that be a phone thing that I did for people. And I would just do a live Zoom call and, screen share, and I'd show them a lot of secrets that weren't in my book. And so those are really helpful. And I'll bring those back at some point, maybe reconfigure it a little bit. So do that, and then just regular, business, big projects. And then also I just launched this online course. So that will be a revenue stream as well. But those are the ways.
Yeah, thanks for sharing so much detail on that. I definitely know about the books. My wife's written a couple books now, and you don't make anything from the books themselves, but they are great for building credibility. So like bringing you speaking events, and then also clients, like you said.
Yeah, and here's a tip for everyone on books and speaking. If you can, you have to always remember that the book is going to be much more valuable as a lead generator than you have to kind of weigh it. Like Amazon. When Amazon hired me for something, I gave them a discount because I can forever say Amazon is a client, right? So that's what you have to do that trade-off. And I was negotiating a conference fee one time, and they really wanted to give my book to attendees. So I said I wanted them to buy it. And I said, look, if you buy my book, I'll reduce my fee. And so they bought my books, and they sent my book to anybody who registered in advance. That it was an incentive. So a lot of people read my book before they came, including one guy who read it on the plane. I spoke at the conference. People felt like they already knew me because they read my book. It's a fast read. And as soon as I got off the stage, he said, I want to hire you. So because he had already read the book, so if you can use your book as an incentive for conference organizers, that's great.
Yeah,
do we ever have conferences again? Sorry,
right.
I forgot what era I'm in now.
Yeah, well, virtual conferences, they can get their ebooks and
Oh yeah, there you go.
yeah,
Yeah, those are much less expensive.
right. Yeah, that's a cool story. Thanks for sharing that.
Hmm.
Yeah, so you've got your I guess looking forward from where you are today, you have your online course, which you're getting that launched now. So that will be, an upcoming income stream, and then you'll bring back like the consulting calls at some point.
Hmm.
Awesome. So what are you looking most forward to as far as like the future goes? Like what does, the outlook look like for you? Like what are you excited about? Like, what's coming?
Well, gosh, I just want to have my course done and running in the background. So, because I have been living and breathing that thing night and day, I've been starting to get, the work starting to pick up again. I'm getting big projects. I'm naming a new flatbread right now. I'm naming a new national chain of spas. So that's what, just doing that is what I really love to do. So that's what I'm looking most forward to, just getting back into that routine of just doing that and, doing some core stuff, doing my coaching calls with people. But for the most part, just getting back into a routine. And because I thought after I wrote my latest edition of my book, I'm like, okay, I'm done. I can rest on my laurels now. And then COVID hit, and it's like, okay, I have all this free time. I better do something with it. And I didn't want to organize my closet. So I thought, well, I'll just create a course. How long does that take?
Yeah. Yeah, online course, it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I just want to say, thank you for taking the time both to speak at the meetup and also come here on the podcast and share, so much of your wisdom with us. Before I open the floor to have, for you to say where people can find you and connect with you, knowing that a lot of listeners here are trying to grow their influence and make a living, sort of on that kind of platform that they're building. Do you have any last words for our listeners today?
I would say, again, don't be afraid of humor. I think that's what is really magnetic. And for me, it's like choose a platform, and LinkedIn is where my people are. So that's where I go, and it's nice to be affiliated and associated with people there. Like today somebody tagged me in a post with a bunch of other like big authors, and it was like, oh, I'm in good company. So yeah, that's what I would just say. But I understand everyone is different, and you got to find where your people are and go there.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Let's say someone listened today, got a ton of value. They want to send you just a private message or just say a thank you, or where do you want our listeners to connect with you? Like,
Connect with me on LinkedIn at Alexandra Watkins. There's no I in my name. My email is alexandra@eatmywords.com. And if you want to see a great example of how humor is used in business, go to eatmywords.com.
awesome. Well, thanks so much for sharing us with us today. No, I really appreciate it. I learned a lot from you, so I appreciate it too.
Oh my gosh, thank you for asking me so many questions that nobody's ever asked me. That's what I love, because I do podcasts all the time, and like you pretty much every question you ask me, no one's ever asked me. So that was really refreshing for me. I mean, that totally energized me.
That's awesome. Yeah, I heard you make a comment earlier in the conversation saying that, and I was like, oh, that feels good. It's a good compliment because I know you've been on a lot of podcasts, and you're like, I'm hitting some new questions.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, that does, go into what I was going to ask at the end is like, you've been to my meetup now, and then now you've been a guest on my podcast. I'm just curious if you have any feedback for me because I'm on my own journey. So whether it's positive or constructive, just, I like to get that while we're recording so I can be held accountable.
Like A plus on doing the podcast. Like your questions are so good. I think with a lot of podcasts I've done, the podcasters send the questions in advance, which is really helpful because sometimes you can't like you had let me know just right ahead of time about like I was gonna need to like give an example of something and like I had to think. But I know like there's a really good podcaster named Dob Barron. And if you go on my website under About and look at our podcast page and listen to me on his Leadership and Loyalty podcast and listen to his questions, I listened to tons of his podcasts before I was on his podcast, so I was prepared for what he might ask me. And you can tell by my answers how ready I was. And I feel like I didn't waste any time or nothing was really like, when he said, what's your guilty pleasure? I think he asked me that question. Whatever he asked, I wasn't caught off guard because I don't like being caught off guard. Although everything you asked me, I could. So that's helpful to a lot of people. And that's it. And then for your meetup, no, that was good. I think knowing a little bit more about like what the audience needs are in advance would be helpful.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the feedback. Thanks for coming on here and sharing with us. And thank you for taking the time to listen today and hear what Alexandra had to share. This is a self-development related podcast. So, just taking the time and listening to this in entirety is an accomplishment. So make sure to pat yourself on the back for tuning in and listening to it. And if you're trying to grow your influence and grow your voice, then you're more than welcome to join us with our weekly influencer meetup calls, which we use Zoom. And if you go to our website, winefluence.com, there's a community tab and you can sign up there and join for the community. But otherwise, I'll put all the links to Alexandra's information in the description below and in the show notes. And I definitely encourage you to go check out what she's doing, connect with her on LinkedIn, and shoot her an email with just maybe a takeaway that you got from today. So just want to say thanks and